The first shovel of wet earth struck Elena Moretti across the mouth before she had finished drawing breath. Grit filled her teeth. Mud slid down the collar of her black work shirt as she twisted against the plastic restraints cutting into her wrists. She lay at the bottom of an open grave in the Caruso family cemetery, surrounded by stone angels, dead roses, and 6 armed men who had once trusted her with every lock in their homes. Rain rattled against the canvas canopy overhead. Beyond the grave stood Dante Caruso, motionless in a charcoal overcoat, holding a tablet that appeared to contain every reason he needed to kill her. "Stop," Elena's voice came out raw. The soldier raising the second shovel looked toward Dante. Dante gave no signal, so the dirt fell. It struck Elena's shoulder and spread across her chest. "You entered the reserve room at 2:13 this morning," Dante said. His voice was quiet enough to make the grave feel colder. At 2:19, $12 million disappeared. At 2:24, Matteo Rusk was found dead beside the service elevator. At 2:31, the money arrived in an account registered to Teresa Moretti. Elena stared up through the rain. "My mother has been dead for 11 years. That did not prevent someone from using her passport number." Dante turned the tablet toward her. Grainy security footage showed Elena crossing the marble corridor beneath the Caruso casino, placing her hand against the biometric panel, and entering the reserve room alone. A second window displayed her access code. A third showed the transfer authorization bearing her encrypted signature. It was not merely evidence, it was a complete story, assembled so perfectly that anyone questioning it would appear desperate. "I went into that room," Elena said. A murmur passed among the soldiers. Dante's expression hardened, but Elena forced herself to continue. "I did not take your money, and Matteo was alive when I left. You denied being there 20 minutes ago, because whoever built that footage has access to your internal security network. If I told you what I found in front of your men, the person who killed Matteo would know exactly what I know." Dante descended one step toward the grave. For 5 years, Elena had repaired his safes, redesigned his panic rooms, and quietly corrected weaknesses his security chiefs were too proud to admit. He had relied on her hands while rarely looking long enough to see the woman attached to them. Tonight, however, his dark eyes held nothing except controlled fury. "You had 5 years to learn how this family protects itself," he said. "You mistook access for immunity. And you're mistaking perfect evidence for true evidence." Dante's jaw tightened. "Continue." The soldier drove his shovel into the pile again. A heavier load landed across Elena's abdomen. Panic climbed into her throat, but she swallowed it. Begging would not save her. Only a flaw could. She closed her eyes and rebuilt the reserve room mechanism in her mind. A titanium deadbolt, dual magnetic sensors, a counterweighted cam, and a customized cylinder she had installed after Dante survived an assassination attempt. Then she remembered the image on the tablet. "Play the footage again. You are in no position to make requests. Zoom in on my hand when the lock opens." Dante did not move. 6 inches from the bottom of this grave," Elena said. "There's a drainage pipe running east. Your men measured the plot this afternoon but didn't compensate for the storm. If they keep throwing soil from that side, the wall will collapse before they finish, and 2 of them will fall in with me. I notice mechanisms, Dante. It is why you hired me. Now look at the lock." One of the soldiers glanced uneasily toward the softening wall. Dante replayed the footage. Elena watched his thumb stop on the frame she needed. "The keyway turns clockwise," she said. "So? I rebuilt that cylinder 18 months ago. It opens counterclockwise only. A reverse cam blocks clockwise rotation after 9 degrees. Dante enlarged the image. The silver key in the recording had clearly rotated to the right. "The footage is mirrored," one soldier said. "It can't be," Elena answered. "The room number is readable above the door. Whoever manufactured the entry sequence used an older digital model of the lock." For the first time, doubt disturbed Dante's face. It lasted less than a second. "A flawed video does not explain your signature, the account, or Matteo's blood on your coat. No, it proves someone expected you to stop checking once you saw my face." Dante lowered the tablet. "Give me a name." "I don't have one yet." The soldier lifted another shovel. "But I know what they were looking for." Elena turned her face away as more earth fell. It covered her hips now, pressing her legs into the grave. The reserve room was never the target. The money was camouflage. Someone searched the wall behind deposit compartment 87. Dante's gaze sharpened. That compartment is empty. Not empty. Misidentified. The stone behind it contains an impression from an antique key. Double ward, narrow shaft, 7 uneven cuts. I saw the same pattern this morning on the maintenance drawing Matteo died protecting. Elena breathed through the weight on her body. Your father owned that key. Nothing moved above her. Even the shovels became still. Dante's father, Vittorio Caruso, had been murdered 15 years earlier, and no one in the family spoke of the objects removed from his body. Choose your next words carefully, Dante said. The key is hidden inside his watch. Dante's hand drifted toward the old silver watch beneath his cuff. He had worn it since the funeral. There is no key. The back casing is thicker than the original manufacturer's specification. Press the winding crown inward, then turn it left. Dante studied her as though deciding whether this was one final manipulation. Then he removed the watch. He pressed the crown. Nothing happened. Left, Elena repeated. Not counterclockwise from your angle, from the face. He adjusted his grip and turned. The back sprang open. A narrow brass key slid into his palm. One soldier crossed himself. Dante stared at the object, and something more dangerous than anger entered his eyes. What does it open? A vault under your father's mausoleum. It was sealed on the night he died. How do you know? Because someone tried to duplicate that key 3 days ago. They used my milling machine, then erased the workshop log. Matteo called me after midnight and told me to check compartment 87. Before I could warn you, your security chief confiscated my phone and brought me here. Dante looked toward Marco Belandi, the silver-haired security chief standing beside the cemetery gate. Marco's face remained calm. Standard containment procedure, he said. She was carrying a dead guard's blood and had access to stolen funds. And you searched her workshop? Dante asked, after the alarm. Elena saw the calculation behind Marco's stillness. He knew she lacked enough evidence to accuse anyone. More importantly, he knew Dante had not forgiven her. If that key exists, Marco said, she may have planted it months ago. Dante closed his fist around the brass key. The grave wall cracked beside Elena's shoulder. Soil shifted with a low, wet groan. Dante looked from the collapsing earth to his father's watch. Get her out. 2 men jumped down and pulled Elena free seconds before the eastern wall folded into the grave. Her legs could barely hold her. Dante did not apologize or remove her restraints. He marched her through the rain toward the mausoleum while Marco and 4 soldiers followed. Inside, Elena located a hairline seam behind Vittorio's stone sarcophagus. The hidden keyhole was clogged with 15 years of wax and limestone dust. With trembling fingers, she cleaned it using a steel pick taken from her belt. Dante inserted the brass key. It stopped halfway. There is a second lock, Elena said, pressing her ear to the stone. Beneath the rain and their breathing came a faint metallic vibration. Not machinery awakening, machinery already running. Someone's cutting through the rear wall. Marco drew his pistol. Dante pulled Elena behind the sarcophagus as sparks suddenly flashed through the seam. A cutting wheel screamed from the darkness beyond it. Elena reached around Dante, drove her pick into the secondary release, and felt 7 ancient levers rise one by one. The concealed door opened 3 inches. Hot smoke poured into the mausoleum. On the other side, a masked man dropped his saw, raised a suppressed pistol, and aimed, not at Elena, but directly at Marco Belandi. The masked man fired before Dante could move. Elena drove her shoulder into Dante's back, knocking him behind the sarcophagus as the suppressed shot cracked through the mausoleum. The bullet missed Marco's heart but tore through his upper arm, spinning him against the stone wall. Dante's soldiers returned fire, shattering the hidden door and driving the attacker backward into the smoke. Elena dropped beside Marco. Blood pulsed between his fingers, but the wound appeared clean. Pressure above the entry point, she ordered. Marco tried to raise his pistol. Elena kicked it away before he could mistake movement for another threat, then seized the handkerchief from his jacket and tied it tightly around his arm. The bullet passed through. You'll live if you stop fighting me. He was aiming at me, Marco gasped. That doesn't make you innocent, Elena said. The cutting wheel had stopped, but boots scraped against metal somewhere beyond the vault. Dante grabbed Elena's restrained wrists and pulled her toward him. "Can you close this door? Not while I'm tied." He produced a knife and cut the restraints. Angry red welts circled her wrists, but she forced her fingers to work. The attacker had entered through a maintenance tunnel cut into the vault's rear wall. If he reached the cemetery drainage network, he could disappear beneath 3 acres of woodland. Elena examined the ancient mechanism and found a narrow emergency lever behind the lowest hinge. Everyone out except Dante. Marco stared at her. "You're giving orders now?" "The door uses a counterweight. When I release it, anything standing in the threshold will be crushed." "Move." The soldiers dragged Marco into the mausoleum. Dante remained beside Elena, pistol trained on the smoke. She inserted her pick into the release channel, rotated it until the upper tumblers disengaged, then struck the lever with her palm. The stone door began to descend. A gloved hand shot through the narrowing gap and fired blindly. Dante shielded Elena, returning 2 shots. She hooked the attacker's abandoned power cable around the bottom hinge and pulled. The cable caught the descending slab for half a second, just long enough for the masked man to believe he could escape through it. His boot appeared under the door. Elena released the cable. Stone slammed down on his ankle. He screamed and fell on the opposite side, but before Dante could reach him, an explosion boomed inside the tunnel. The floor lifted. Dust and fragments of masonry blasted into the mausoleum, forcing everyone backward. When the air cleared, the concealed doorway remained sealed, and the attacker's boot was gone. "He blew the tunnel behind him," Marco said through clenched teeth. Elena touched the scorched stone. "A directional charge, installed before tonight. Whoever planned this knew the mausoleum's construction." Dante looked at Marco. "Who has access to the architectural records?" "My office, the estate engineer, and your legal counsel," Marco answered. "Sebastian Vale keeps the original property archive." Sebastian had served the Caruso family for 22 years. He had negotiated their corporate settlements, protected their legitimate shipping interests, and stood beside Dante at Vittorio's funeral. Accusing him without proof would fracture the family council before Elena could learn what he wanted. "What was the attacker trying to destroy?" Dante asked. Elena examined the exposed edge of the vault door. The cutting marks were not aimed at the lock. They formed a rectangle around a narrow stone compartment embedded in the rear wall. Not destroy, remove. Using the brass key and her pick, she completed the locking sequence. The ancient door opened far enough for them to enter. The explosion had collapsed the tunnel, filling half the chamber with rubble, but the compartment remained intact. Inside sat a leather ledger, 3 sealed envelopes, and an empty velvet recess shaped like a small rectangular case. Dante reached for the ledger. Elena caught his wrist. His eyes dropped to her hand. "The person who framed me manufactured footage and planted financial records," she said. "Assume everything here is designed to mislead you until we authenticate it." She slipped on a pair of thin work gloves from her belt and examined the dust. The ledger was coated evenly, except for a clean oval on its spine. Someone had handled it within the last few minutes. One envelope bore Vittorio Caruso's wax seal, but the wax remained faintly warm from the cutting torch. "The documents may be genuine," she said, "but someone has already removed whatever was stored in that velvet recess." Dante studied its dimensions. What belonged there? Elena measured the imprint with her fingers. A recording device, or a small data cartridge. Something roughly 4 inches long. Marco leaned against the entrance, his injured arm bound to his chest. The gunman could have taken it. Then why stay and continue cutting after he had it? Elena asked. "Because he was waiting for us," Dante said. The realization silenced them. The attacker had not been caught breaking into the vault. He had deliberately made enough noise to draw them inside, then fired at Marco, while leaving apparently historic evidence for Dante to find. Someone wanted Marco dead, and the ledger discovered on the same night Elena was framed. A soldier approached with Elena's confiscated phone sealed in an evidence bag. "Boss, this started ringing during the explosion. The screen showed no number, only an encrypted incoming call." Dante placed it on the sarcophagus and activated the speaker. A distorted male voice filled the mausoleum. "Elena Moretti has opened Vittorio's vault, exactly as promised. Now ask Dante why his father paid Teresa Moretti $200,000 6 days before he was murdered." The call ended. Every face turned toward Elena. She stared at her dead mother's name glowing on the screen, understanding too late why the stolen 12 million had been placed in Teresa's account. Dante slowly raised his pistol again. You told me your mother never knew my father. She didn't. Then someone buried a lie 15 years ago, Dante said, and tonight they nearly buried you with it. Dante did not lower the pistol, but neither did he point it at Elena. No one leaves the cemetery, he ordered. Collect every phone, secure the vault, and move Marco to the underground clinic. If anyone contacts Sebastian Vale, I will consider it treason. Marco's face tightened. Vale will learn something is wrong when I miss the morning security briefing. Then let him wonder. Dante placed Elena's phone inside his coat and escorted her across the rain-soaked grounds toward the mansion. He kept one hand near his weapon, treating her neither as a prisoner nor an ally. Inside the war room, he locked the doors and projected the reserve room footage across 6 screens. Elena stood barefoot on the polished floor, her shoes having been lost in the grave, with mud drying across her clothes and blood from Marco's wound staining her hands. Dante offered her neither sympathy nor apology. He gave her something more useful: access. Prove the recording is false. Elena enlarged the frame, showing her key turning clockwise. The room number and clock remained correctly oriented, eliminating a simple mirrored image. She isolated the reflection in the brass trim surrounding the door. In that reflection, the corridor was empty, even though her recorded figure stood less than 3 feet away. They inserted my body into existing footage, she said. The background came from an architectural security model made before I reversed the lock 18 months ago. Dante opened the system archive. Only 3 people could authorize access to those models: Dante, Marco, and Sebastian Vale, whose legal office maintained copies for insurance compliance. Marco could have provided it, Dante said. Yes, but the gunman tried to kill him after drawing us into the vault. Either Marco was being silenced, or the shooting was staged to make him look innocent. Elena refused to offer Dante an easy conclusion. We test both possibilities. He studied her for a moment. You still believe evidence matters after I put you in a grave. Her hands paused over the keyboard. Evidence mattered before you did that. It matters more now. The answer struck him harder than an accusation. Dante looked away first. Elena examined the transfer authorization. Her encrypted signature had been generated through a physical security token registered to her workshop computer. The token had never left her key cabinet, and only her fingerprint could open it, yet the log showed it being activated at 2:16, 3 minutes after the false footage placed her beneath the casino. My workshop is 40 minutes from the reserve room, she said. Even if I stole the money, I could not have activated this token and appeared on that camera 3 minutes apart. Remote access? Impossible without opening the cabinet. Dante called up the workshop feed. At 2:14, the camera had gone dark for 90 seconds. When it returned, the cabinet appeared untouched. Elena zoomed in on the lock face and found a faint crescent scratch beneath the keyway. Someone opened it with a duplicate. You said only your fingerprint works. The fingerprint releases the cabinet's electronic latch. The mechanical override was designed for fire emergencies. She retrieved the confiscated tools from Dante's evidence case and measured the scratch. Its width matched the antique key blank someone had milled in her workshop 3 days earlier. The 2 crimes were connected. Whoever copied Vittorio's key had also copied Elena's override key and stolen her token. Dante called his financial controller on a secure line and ordered the $12 million transfer frozen. The answer came back within 2 minutes. The money had already been divided among 4 shell companies, then deposited into an escrow account tied to the East Harbor terminal. If the funds were not returned by noon, Caruso Maritime would violate the capital guarantee supporting its new port contract. Under the emergency clause, control of the terminal would pass to an interim trustee until the loss was resolved. Dante opened the contract and read the trustee's name, Sebastian Vale. He wrote the agreement, Elena said. Vale writes every agreement. And tomorrow afternoon, the family council is supposed to approve the terminal partnership at your foundation gala. If the missing reserve becomes public before the vote, they will remove you from operational control and appoint the trustee. Sebastian would temporarily control my legal fleet, customs records, and every container entering East Harbor, including containers No one is supposed to inspect. Dante's expression changed. The conspiracy was not merely about $12 million. Someone wanted the terminal and the access it offered. Elena turned to the ledger recovered from Vittorio's vault. Under magnification, the paper fibers and oxidation appeared consistent with a 15-year-old document, but the final 3 pages had been replaced. Their edges were too clean, and the handwritten entries had been copied using brown ink artificially aged with heat. One false entry recorded a $200,000 payment to Teresa Moretti. My mother's name was added recently, Elena said. Whoever altered this expected us to find it tonight. Dante searched the earlier authentic pages. Teresa's name appeared once more, but not beside a payment. It was written in Vittorio's hand, next to a numbered safe deposit box, and the words, "Return the mercy key before the bells." Elena recognized the phrase. Her mother had whispered it during the fever that killed her, but Elena had dismissed it as delirium. After the funeral, she had found an unfamiliar iron key sewn inside Teresa's coat. It had opened nothing in their apartment, so Elena stored it in the one place no burglar would think to search, inside the hollow handle of her oldest locksmith's hammer. She had used that hammer every day for 11 years. "The key is still in my workshop," she said. Dante immediately called the team guarding the building. No one answered. The workshop cameras showed smoke spreading beneath the front door. A figure wearing a fire service jacket entered, carrying a fuel can. Elena watched him walk directly toward her workbench. Then the figure looked up at the camera and removed his mask. It was Matteo Rusk, the guard whose dead body Elena had seen beside the service elevator less than 3 hours earlier. Elena watched Matteo's image move through the burning workshop while Dante ordered cars prepared. "Wait," she said. "That feed isn't live." She rewound 6 seconds. A brass pendulum clock hung above her workbench, its second hand moving normally, until Matteo crossed beneath it. Then it jumped backward by 4 seconds. The flames near the doorway repeated the same curl twice. It's a loop assembled from footage recorded earlier tonight. The fire may be real, but Matteo isn't there now. She enlarged the workbench. Her locksmith's hammer was already missing when the supposed intruder entered. Matteo had taken it before Elena was arrested, then created the false broadcast to draw Dante away from the mansion. "What happens here if we leave?" she asked. Dante checked the estate schedule. At 8 o'clock, the family council would arrive for an emergency meeting Sebastian Vale had requested, after learning about the stolen reserve. With Dante absent, Vale could invoke the security clause and assume temporary authority. "He is forcing the vote early," Dante said. Elena studied the hammer's empty outline. "Then we let him believe he has the mercy key." She called Sebastian from Dante's secured desk phone. When Vale answered, Elena filled her voice with panic. "The workshop is burning. Matteo took my hammer before the fire. The key was inside it." She disconnected before Sebastian could question her. Dante raised an eyebrow. That sounded convincing. Being buried by your employer improves one's ability to communicate distress. Shame crossed his face, but Elena gave him no opportunity to apologize. She opened the base of her tool case and removed a thin iron key wrapped in oilcloth. The hammer contained a duplicate. "My mother taught me never to hide a real key inside the object used to make copies." Dante looked at the tiny package. "You lied to me. I withheld the location from a man who had ordered my grave filled." She placed the key in her palm, but did not surrender it. "If we work together, I control the locks. You control the armed men. Neither of us acts without explaining why." Dante had spent his life issuing commands that were obeyed before he finished speaking. For several seconds, the old instinct fought across his expression. Then he unloaded his pistol, placed it on the table, and slid it toward her. Agreed. The words did not restore trust, but they changed the balance between them. The clue in Vittorio's ledger led them to the abandoned bell tower of St. Mercy Church, 2 miles from the estate. Elena, Dante, and 2 guards entered through a sealed side door while the rest remained outside. Behind the bell mechanism, Elena found a small iron box fitted into the stone. Her mother's key opened it. Inside lay the missing rectangular recorder from Vittorio's vault and an original copy of the East Harbor Terminal deed. The recorder contained a single damaged audio file dated 6 days before Vittorio's murder. Vittorio's voice emerged through static. Teresa, if I die, the man who controls the terminal contract arranged it. Do not trust the copy in my vault. The Mercy recording and the original deed must be presented together. One proves intent, the other proves motive. A second man answered, but the damage distorted his voice beyond recognition. Your son will sign when he is old enough. If you refuse, he will inherit a grave instead of an empire. The recording ended with a church bell and 3 muffled gunshots. Dante stood frozen. His father had known the murder was coming and had entrusted the evidence to Elena's mother. Before either could speak, the bell above them began to swing. No one had touched its rope. Elena heard a mechanical click inside the supporting beam and shoved Dante down as gunfire tore through the wooden platform. One guard fell, the other fired toward the stairwell, while Elena crawled beneath the bell housing and found a remote trigger wired into its motor. She ripped out the receiver, stopping the bell before its 2-ton weight could break loose above them. Dante covered her as they retreated into the stone alcove. A phone strapped beneath the receiver lit up with a newly arrived message. Key confirmed. Bring her to the gala. Sebastian Vale's number did not appear on the screen, but the message carried an authentication code used only by his legal office. For the first time, they had a direct connection, but not yet enough to prove Sebastian had sent it. Dante looked at Elena, no longer as an employee or suspect, but as the only person in the room who had saved both the evidence and his life. Tell me what you need. Elena closed her fingers around the recorder. Make everyone believe you still intend to execute me. By 10 the next morning, every member of the Caruso family council had received the same announcement. Elena Moretti had confessed to stealing the reserve, murdering Matteo Rusk, and fabricating evidence against Sebastian Vale. Dante would bring her to the Foundation Gala in chains, allow the council to question her, then carry out her sentence after the East Harbor vote. The announcement spread exactly as Elena intended. The gala could not be canceled because the Port Authority required the partnership documents before noon. Failure to sign would activate the emergency trusteeship and hand Vale control automatically. Elena's plan required him to believe victory was close enough to touch. Before leaving the estate, Dante tested the 2 men closest to the investigation. He told Marco that the original deed would travel inside an armored vehicle using the north entrance. He told Sebastian that Elena had hidden it beneath the false bottom of her tool case, which would remain handcuffed to her wrist. An hour later, the armored vehicle reached the gala untouched, while 2 gunmen disguised as catering staff attempted to steal Elena's case. Marco had passed the test. Sebastian had acted on the controlled lie. The gunmen were captured alive, but neither carried a phone or identification, and both refused to speak. It connected Vale to the ambush only by timing, not by evidence strong enough to defeat him before the council. Elena entered the ballroom wearing steel cuffs and the same mud-stained clothes in which Dante had nearly buried her. Hundreds of guests watched her pass between armed soldiers. Some whispered that the curvy locksmith had seduced her way into the Caruso vaults. Others openly called for her death. Dante walked behind her with an expression of cold disgust, so convincing that even Elena briefly remembered the earth pressing against her chest. At the center of the ballroom stood Sebastian Vale, silver-haired, elegant, and calm. You should have killed her in the cemetery, he told Dante. Opening my father's vault exposed the thief who hid behind my family for 15 years. Dante replied loudly. Sebastian's eyes flicked toward Elena's tool case. That single glance confirmed he knew the false location of the deed. The council assembled around a long table, while corporate representatives waited beside the unsigned East Harbor agreement. Sebastian presented the stolen transfer, Elena's forged signature, and the altered ledger entry involving Teresa Moretti. Then he displayed a hospital record proving Teresa had paid exactly $200,000 for private cancer treatment 4 days after Vittorio's death. Elena's stomach tightened. The payment had been real, not a reward, but money her mother had used while hiding its origin from her daughter. Teresa Moretti accepted Vittorio's money, Sebastian declared. Her daughter later stole his key, emptied his reserve, and manufactured a recording to accuse the attorney responsible for protecting his estate. Dante ordered Elena's tool case placed on the table. Sebastian opened the false bottom himself and found nothing. His confidence faltered. Looking for this? Elena asked. Marco entered from the north doorway carrying the original deed in a sealed evidence sleeve. Dante played Vittorio's recording. Several council members recognized the second speaker's cadence as Sebastian's, but Vale merely smiled. A damaged recording found by the accused woman, played by the man facing removal. Convenient. He produced an audio report bearing the signature of a respected forensic laboratory. According to the report, the recording had been assembled from separate conversations, and therefore could not establish guilt. Then Matteo Rusk walked into the ballroom alive. He claimed Elena had abducted him, killed another guard, and forced him to access the security archive. The room erupted. Matteo displayed burns around his wrists, and a video of Elena apparently threatening him inside her workshop. Dante had expected fabricated testimony, but not a living witness carrying injuries and footage prepared before the trap. Sebastian called for an immediate vote. 6 council members raised their hands to remove Dante from control. 2 hesitated, then followed. Under the emergency clause, Sebastian became trustee of East Harbor. Armed security contractors stationed outside by the Port Authority entered the ballroom and obeyed his first command. They disarmed Dante's men, seized the deed and recorder, then dragged Elena toward a glass display vault installed for the gala's charity diamonds. Sebastian locked her inside it and activated the timed air seal. "You have 12 minutes," he whispered through the glass. Just long enough to watch Dante sign away everything his father died protecting. Elena looked at the lock, then at the supposedly original deed now resting beside Sebastian's hand. She saw a tiny crescent cut along its brass seal, the mark left when someone had opened it with the duplicate mercy key. Sebastian had taken the bait, but he had also replaced the deed. To expose him, Elena would have to escape a vault she herself had designed, to remain locked even after its occupant stopped breathing. The vault's timer reached 8 minutes when Elena slipped the narrow steel filament hidden inside the chain of her handcuffs. She and Dante had prepared it as a mechanical fallback because any electronic device could be detected or disabled. Elena freed her right hand, removed the rubber gasket surrounding the internal air sensor, and inserted the filament into the maintenance channel behind it. The vault had 6 motorized bolts, but only one mechanical governor prevented them from retracting during a power failure. She caught its spring, twisted until it snapped, then pressed both palms against the door. The bolts withdrew. The glass opened, while Sebastian was placing the East Harbor agreement before Dante. Every guest turned, as Elena stepped out carrying the broken cuff. "The woman you condemned has just escaped another grave," Dante announced. "This time, everyone will watch her explain who locked her inside." Sebastian ordered his contractors to seize her, but Marco's men entered through the north doors with representatives from the Port Authority's internal fraud division. They possessed jurisdiction over the terminal contract and had been waiting outside until Elena could prove the trustee had knowingly manipulated the vote. Sebastian held up his laboratory report. "Her recording is fraudulent." "Your report is," Elena said. The certificate showed that the audio analysis had been completed at 4:12 that morning. Vittorio's recorder had not been recovered from St. Mercy's bell tower until 5:03. More importantly, the report contained the recording's exact digital hash, a unique identifier impossible to know without possessing the original file. Sebastian's legal office had created its rebuttal 51 minutes before Elena found the evidence. "You removed the recorder from Vittorio's vault years ago," Elena said, "copied its file, then returned the device to St. Mercy after altering the last section. Last night your gunman tried to retrieve it before I opened the vault. An independent audio specialist working for the Port Authority displayed a second report prepared from the recorder's protected memory. The version Sebastian had analyzed was damaged, but the device retained an automatic backup beneath its operating partition. The unaltered recording contained Vittorio naming Sebastian Vale as the architect of the terminal seizure and identifying the shell company that had paid for his murder. That shell company now controlled one of the 4 accounts holding the stolen $12 million. Sebastian argued that Dante could have planted the backup. Elena answered by displaying the authentication code recovered from the bell tower receiver. It had been issued to Matteo by Sebastian's office 6 months earlier and used again to send the order bringing Elena to the gala. Matteo reached for a contractor's gun. Marco shot the weapon from his hand, and Matteo fled toward the service corridor. Elena activated the ballroom's emergency security partitions. Steel shutters dropped across every exit except the route leading back toward the charity vault. Matteo ran through the open passage and found himself trapped between two reinforced doors, the same directional lock system he had copied incorrectly in the fabricated footage. He fired at the controls, but the bullets ricocheted harmlessly. In his pocket, investigators found Elena's stolen security token, the Mercy Key duplicate, and a detonator matched to the explosives used beneath the mausoleum. Sebastian still refused to yield. He seized the supposedly original East Harbor deed and claimed it granted him permanent authority regardless of the council's vote. Elena pointed to the crescent cut along its brass seal. Before the gala, she had coated the duplicate key with a colorless forensic compound. When Sebastian secretly opened the deed case and replaced its contents, the compound transferred onto his fingers. Under ultraviolet light, both hands glowed blue. The true deed had never entered the ballroom. Marco had carried a replica while the original remained sealed with the Port Authority. Sebastian had replaced a document he believed was genuine, proving he knew the location supplied only through Elena's controlled lie. Faced with the premature audio report, the shell company transfer, Matteo's equipment, and the marked deed, the council reversed its vote. Port investigators froze the trusteeship and detained Sebastian. He triggered his final contingency by pressing a switch hidden in his ring. Charges exploded beneath the ballroom floor, opening a path to the old service tunnel. Sebastian dragged Elena toward it at gunpoint, believing Dante would surrender the original recorder to save her. Elena stamped on Sebastian's instep, hooked the broken handcuff chain around his wrist, and locked it to the vault's exterior handle. Sebastian fired, grazing her side, but could not free himself. Dante reached them and aimed at Sebastian's head. "If you kill him," Elena said through the pain, "he becomes the victim of a Caruso execution. Let him survive long enough to hear every charge." Dante lowered the gun. It was the first time he had surrendered vengeance because Elena asked him to. Sebastian was arrested alive as the gala's cameras continued broadcasting. In front of the same council that had watched her arrive in chains, Dante declared Elena innocent and accepted personal responsibility for ordering her burial without giving her a fair chance to challenge the evidence. Then he placed his authority over East Harbor into independent review and asked Elena to oversee the redesign of every security system Sebastian had compromised. Elena pressed a hand against her bleeding side. "That is not forgiveness," she told him. "No," Dante answered. "It is only the first debt I intend to repay." Elena spent 4 days in the hospital and 6 weeks recovering from the gunshot wound. Dante visited only when invited. He never brought flowers, never asked her to comfort him, and never attempted to turn guilt into romance. On his first visit, he stood beside her bed and said, "I ordered men to bury you because the evidence supported what I already feared, that anyone close to me would eventually betray me. I trusted my fear more than your character. There is no defense for that." Elena listened without rescuing him from the silence. "I cannot give you back those minutes in the grave," he continued. "I can only make certain no one under my authority is ever condemned that way again." Dante abolished the family's private execution system and transferred all internal accusations to an independent investigative council. The decision cost him 3 alliances and nearly half his influence, but he refused to reverse it. He also placed East Harbor under federal customs oversight, surrendered the illegal routes Sebastian had planned to inherit, and opened Caruso Maritime's records to external auditors. The recovered $12 million was returned after investigators froze Sebastian's shell companies. Matteo accepted a reduced sentence in exchange for identifying the men involved in Vittorio's murder, but his testimony was supported by transfer records, explosives residue, and the unaltered recording, rather than treated as sufficient on its own. Sebastian Vale was convicted of conspiracy, murder, attempted murder, corporate fraud, and witness tampering. Teresa Moretti's name was publicly cleared. Vittorio had paid for her cancer treatment after asking her to protect the Mercy Key and recording. She had accepted the money only after securing the evidence beyond his reach, then kept the secret to prevent Sebastian from using Elena against her. 3 months later, Dante called another meeting in the same ballroom where Elena had been displayed in chains. Before the family council, port officials, employees, and cameras, He presented the complete evidence proving her innocence. He admitted that her imprisonment and attempted execution had occurred under his direct command. Then he announced that Caruso Maritime would compensate the family of the guard Matteo had murdered, restore every employee punished during Sebastian's manipulation, and fund an independent security firm owned entirely by Elena. When he offered her control of the company's security division, she declined. "I will never again work inside a system where your signature can erase my freedom," she said, before the council. "Then write the system yourself," Dante replied. Elena founded Moretti Security and accepted Caruso Maritime as a client, under a contract giving her the authority to suspend operations when safety rules were violated, even by Dante. He signed without changing a word. Their relationship rebuilt itself slowly through arguments, audits, late-night repairs, and the unfamiliar experience of Dante following instructions he had not given. He learned that Elena drank terrible vending machine coffee when concentrating and hummed old opera songs while cutting keys. She learned that he visited the families of fallen employees without guards and never allowed anyone to thank him. Attraction had existed between them before trust, but neither confused the two again. 6 months after the gala, Elena completed the final redesign of Vittorio's mausoleum vault. The old door had opened only from the outside. Her new mechanism required 2 independent keys to seal it and contained an internal release no external authority could disable. Dante met her there at sunset, carrying his father's silver watch. The grave where he had nearly killed her had been filled, and a plain stone marker beside it bore the names of everyone Sebastian's conspiracy had erased. Dante handed Elena one of the vault keys. "I am not asking you to forget what happened here." "Good," she said, "because I won't. I am asking whether there is room in your life for the man I am trying to become." Elena held his gaze. He possessed enough power to command almost anyone in the city, but her answer remained entirely her own. "There may be room for dinner," she said. "Nothing more is promised." A restrained smile touched his face. "Dinner is more than I deserve." Together they tested the new mechanism. Dante turned his key from the outside, while Elena stood inside the chamber, her hand resting on the emergency release. The bolts engaged, but the door could no longer become a grave. Elena opened it herself and stepped into the fading light. This time, Dante did not reach for her or tell her where to stand. He simply waited until she chose to walk beside him.